Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Jeffrey A Carver, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here. Name is Jeffrey A Carver, in case you missed it the first time, and I write mostly far future science fiction, somewhere in that borderland between hard science fiction and space opera, with a healthy dose of characterization.
Always fun. And space opera, that's where I started reading sci-fi. I think that's the gateway drug for most people is a good space opera.
It was for me, certainly. No question about that.
All righty. And the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we found him. And this is one of the rare cases where his publicist reached out to me, and I'm glad he did. We have a few publicists that routinely check in and see if their authors fit us, and we're always glad because most of the time those are people I wouldn't have found on my own. So
I'm glad.
We're glad your people reached out. But before we get too deep into this interview, you have to answer the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
I am ready.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Trek.
Okay. What was it that makes that your favorite?
Oh, I just love the characters, particularly in classic Trek and also in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Star Wars is a lot of fun, and you can't beat the John Williams music, but it's a little too pulpy fantasy to hit my top spot. Okay. It took me a little while to warm up to it. I love it, but not on the level I love Star Trek.
Okay.
I also love Firefly, so let's not mistake that. But Star Trek is king.
Absolutely. And so just because you have a favorite doesn't mean you don't like the other things, people. So, all right. And because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
I don't like those choices. Lord of the Rings.
Outstanding. See, we had that on the list originally and everyone said it, so we had to take it off the list. Otherwise it got so repetitive,
Yeah. Well, it is the best.
He's kind of like the godfather of modern fantasy. So
yeah.
Did you like the movie adaptations?
I did, with reservations. What they did well, they did fantastically, and what they did badly, they just made me wince. So I do rewatch them from time to time, but I fast forward through the bits they really screwed up.
Okay, I enjoyed the movies. I like the books too, so I don't have a favorite. The only movies that they did that I didn't really like were Rings of Power. But when you set the bar so high with the first movies and then with The Hobbit, to show something that looks like a stage production by a high school when it comes to costuming and plotting and stuff, it's just like, we've seen what excellent looks like. How can you give us this now?
I agree completely. And as far as The Hobbit goes, they took a relatively short young adult novel and turned it into 3 long movies, and that was a big mistake. Should have been 1 movie. It would have been a great movie.
Yeah, I did felt drawn out at times, but I did like exploring the under with the dwarves and stuff. So it had its place, but mostly I like dwarves in general. If you don't already have the buy-in, I could see where people are like, yeah, this is just too long.
Yeah.
All right. And because it's a crying shame that nobody asked us this question once we reach adulthood, what is your favorite dinosaur, sir?
Boy, that's a toughie, I'm inclined to say Triceratops, because they're just kind of gawky and awkward and lovable.
That is on my top 2. So I appreciate that. I was surprised at how few people give T-Rex as the answer.
I thought about T-Rex, and I thought, well, everybody's going to say T-Rex. I like their little...
That's what everyone else thinks probably too. All right. And because we are civilized human beings here at the Blaster and Blade podcast, we are no longer knuckle-dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea? And how do you take it?
Coffee, dark roast, filter drip, none of this French press stuff. 2/3 calf with a blend of Oatly oat milk and real milk.
Okay, so I'm assuming if you don't like French presses, you probably cringe at a Keurig.
Well, it's a different issue. I don't like sediment in my coffee.
Okay.
Keurigs I don't like because of the waste of all the plastic, but they're okay as a drink.
There are some, if you search the boxes, that are made with recyclable and biodegradable materials. So like they don't last. They're not actual plastic. They're a cardboard variety of some sort that will actually break down.
Well, if they can make them out of cardboard, more power to them. So nothing against that. But as the ones that are plastic, I know if they're technically recyclable, but that doesn't mean they actually get recycled. So that's my beef with that. But
Absolutely. Just because of pricing issues, because the K cups can get expensive, I actually bought one of the reusable ones and I just fill it that way. It's a little cheaper.
Okay.
But I get what you're talking about waste. I try not to make any more trash than I have to. So
yeah.
All right. So in the pre-show we were talking, I understand you won a pretty big award in the last couple of years. So you want to tell us about it?
Well, in 2022, I received the Frank Herbert Lifetime Achievement Award from the Helicon Society. And this came out of the blue. I just got an email actually from my publicist saying, "Hey, congratulations on winning this." And I was like, "What?" It's an association of science fiction professionals, writers and illustrators. And I don't know too much about the group, but they awarded me this. Some of the previous winners were people like Jack McDevitt and Anne McCaffrey. And it felt like quite an honor to me.
Absolutely. So how did you first find like speculative fiction? Was there a specific book? Was it watching Trek on TV? How did you discover the genre?
I grew up on reading, what we would now call young adult science fiction. As a kid, I read and reread the Tom Swift Jr. series, and then same thing with the Tom Corbett Space Cadet, which I still have a fondness for. Occasionally go back and pick up one of those books and leaf through it. Eventually, Heinlein and Asimov and that whole classic crew. And from the very beginning of my reading, science fiction was always my favorite.
What is it about science? Was it the science that you liked? Was it the fact that it seemed plausible?
I loved the science. I loved more the possibilities, the expansive possibilities of a future where we travel to the stars and explore the planets. And I couldn't get enough of that. I'd go out in my backyard and I'd look up at the sky. I lived in Ohio, where you could actually see stars in the sky. And I looked up and I wanted to go there. So I found a different way to do it.
Yeah, I can see that. I've actually talked to a guy that was a submarine captain because he wanted to command the Enterprise, and that wasn't an option. The Star Trek Enterprise, not the aircraft carrier. And he figured since he couldn't command that, submarine was as close as he would get.
I actually have a relative who was a submarine captain too.
I like looking at the sky and seeing the sun too much to ever be a submariner. I mean, yeah. It's a special.
Well, I've always been fascinated with the underwater environment. I watched Jacques Cousteau religiously growing up, his Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, which was his original show. And I learned to scuba dive when I was in college, and I spent a fair amount of time exploring the underwater myself, and that has crept into my writing. I have one novel that is basically set under the ocean on an alien world. And I think there's a very small community of us science fiction writers who have written undersea science fiction. So I'm proud to be part of that group.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think I've read much of that. I mean, I've read Aquanaut stories. They were mostly set on Earth and the Marianas Trench generally. I don't think
in the early days, Fred Pohl and John Williams, I'm blanking on the other's first name. Pohl and Williamson wrote a series that was set underwater, and Alan Steele wrote one, and Jonas Lanzewski. There are a handful of people who have done it, but they don't necessarily rise to the top of the heap when you're looking at these books. But I think it's a fascinating kind of alien world. And one of the things I liked about scuba diving, particularly night diving, was the sense that I was in an alien world.
So is night diving significantly different than diving during the daytime? I imagine after a certain point it's dark regardless, right?
The kind of sport diving most people do, you don't go into darkness when you're diving during the day. You lose some of the color, and it gets gloomier. But at night, everything changes. It's actually more colorful because the lights you carry with you are bringing out the lights on things you look at, and it's not being attenuated by 60 or 80 feet of water as sunlight is. So it's more stark, and in the waters I was diving in, you could wave your hand, turn off your light, wave your hand in front of you, and see the plankton kind of sparkle like stars in front of you. It's just sort of magical.
Wow. I tried a diving class, and the recycled air just made it hard. I just couldn't do it.
Recycled air.
The
because it came from a maybe if you were in a rebreather. Typically with scuba diving, you're just using compressed air.
That might be the word I'm looking for. I just know when we hooked the tank up and breathing that funny flavor, taste in air, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, it was probably the smell probably came from the rubber hoses and the regulators and all that. That's
probably
true.
It wasn't the newest equipment either, because it was one of those things they gave the Boy Scouts for a session. We go in and everyone got to try it on, circled through in a great big swimming pool.
Right.
So I don't know if it's a fair assessment, but I've never had the time or the inclination to go back. So you obviously grew up with the world of science fiction sort of.
It's in my blood.
Yeah, it's in your blood. What made you decide to go from, like, I like consuming this? Because a lot of people consume products, they never feel a desire to go then and create. What made you take that next step?
Well, an interesting question. When I was probably around 12, I guess, my best friend and I sat down and made up a story, and we each wrote our own version of it. And I typed mine out and put it in a little binding. So it must have been in 6th grade then, I think, called The Mysterious Midnight Ride. I still have that. And then I didn't really write anything more until a high school English teacher said, I want you guys to write a short story. And I did that. That was fun. But it's when I went away to college that I really started to, with encouragement from my teachers and my older brother was a big booster of this, people who saw potential in my writing. I just started to pursue this kind of relentlessly and in a way hopelessly, because there was no way I was ever going to earn a living from this. I knew that. And in a way, the smarter thing to do might have been to have learned a useful skill for earning a living while doing this on the side. But no, I made it my prime directive was to write stories. And in the years after I graduated from college, I just kept doing it until I finally sold something. And then I finally sold a novel, and I just never looked back. And now I'm not qualified to do anything else. So this is my chosen path.
It's always good to find things you like. So
Yes.
Have you always exclusively written science fiction, or have you branched out to other genres?
Oh, pretty much. In terms of fiction, that's all I've written. Although some of my SF has a fantasy slant to it. So the borderland between science fiction and fantasy is an interesting one as well, because I wrote in my Star Rigger universe, I wrote 2 books that involved dragons in space, and they were real dragons in a kind of a hyperdimensional layer of space. And there was very much of a fantasy feel to some of that. even though it was actually science fiction. And from time to time, I've been asked to write sort of strange things. I wrote an essay for a book of pictures of cows shot in on infrared film, each one accompanied by a little vignette from a different writer. And I wrote about when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I got a cow lick because a cow licked the back of my head. It's one of these odd sorts of things that come your way when you're involved in the writing world.
So is there any one moment that you think is sort of fundamental in the kind of stories you tell? Or is it more a collection? The whole is the sum of the parts, I guess.
Nah, I'm not actually sure what you're asking there.
Like for me, for instance, like my writing is greatly affected by the war in Iraq, where I spent 2 years of my life. So that affects the kind of stories.
Right.
Other people, that pivotal moment could be anything, and it's always fun exploring what that might be.
Okay, I think for me it was probably when I was a probably a young teenager. That view of the night sky and seeing all of those stars and imagining what might be out there and really wishing I could go there and do that. I think that is the single most important driving factor in my telling stories today.
I stole this shamelessly from a blog, Simon Space. He has a blog where he talks about various like astrological things, but one of the things he always closes with is don't forget to look up. And I thought that was such a good advice that I passed that on to the kids, because I think you get so used to the stars being up there, you forget sometimes like how amazing they are when you look at them.
And that's an experience that more and more people are not getting to have because of light pollution and people living in cities. And now with Elon Musk's constellation of satellites kind of getting in the way of astronomical work. It's a wonderful experience, and I wish everybody could have it. I never, until a month ago, I had never seen a total solar eclipse. And when we had the one that just crossed the big swath across the U.S., I went with my family up into Vermont, and we saw the total eclipse, which was an awesome, just an awesome experience. The descriptions just don't do it justice until you see it in person.
Did it inspire more stories?
I wouldn't say it inspired particular stories, but it reinforced the inspiration. The inspiration comes and goes, and as I've gotten older, I write more slowly, and I have had some trouble with writer's block in the last few years. So anything like that sort of gives me an extra boost. It's like a jump start to a car. So yes.
So you mentioned you've been writing for a while. So what all have you written? Like, could you give us like the Reader's Digest version of your body of work?
Oh, well, I have two major universes that I've written in. One, which is my earliest books began this, called the Star Rigger universe, which is a little more soft science fiction with this includes the dragon books I talked about. It involves a method of star flight in which the pilot goes into a sensory net that reaches out from the ship and sort of it drops into a hyperdimensional layer where there are the pilot can see the topography of space laid out before him or her, and has to use imagination and intuition to navigate through it and sort of overlay their own imagery. And at the time, I wasn't thinking of it as a metaphor for the creative writing process, but another writer pointed out to me, she said, I love that story because it's a perfect metaphor for writing stories. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's what I did. All right. And that was the first hint that I had that I actually write very intuitively. I don't always see what I'm doing until I've already done it. And my other big series is called the Chaos Chronicles, which is more hard science fiction, and starts out in the out on the moon of Triton, the moon of Neptune, and has an alien encounter. And then my reluctant hero John Bandicoot is thrust out into the galaxy, where he's joined together with some alien and AI, also reluctant heroes, and thrown into situations where they have to basically save worlds. And they don't start out knowing what they're doing. They have to pull it together and learn and rise to the occasion. So this is a kind of an interesting challenge to me, because there's a lot of hard SF elements in it. For example, one of the books is called Sunborn, and it involves sentient stars, and it involves potential for hypernova. There's a lot of kind of cosmic elements in it. And at the same time, it's a very personal story about their adventure. So trying to unite the personal and the cosmic was a really interesting and difficult, but ultimately satisfying challenge to me as a writer.
So what is it, because you mentioned reluctant hero is twice as an archetype you've used. What is it about that archetype that appeals to you?
I don't know. I guess I identify with them. I guess they tend to start the story feeling, I don't know, a little bit downtrodden, a little bit working beneath their station, not quite sure what they want or how to go about getting it, even if they did know. And then life forces them to a point where they have to figure this out and have to rise to it. And I guess that's just something that I've always felt an identification with, as a human being myself.
So would it be fair to say then it's the everyman angle that you tend to get with reluctant hero stories?
I guess so. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned, go ahead.
No, I'm just say I hadn't really put it in those terms, but that might be it.
I wouldn't have either, but I had one of my editors point out that I do that a lot, and I started thinking about it, and I could see that, but I always gravitated when I would study history, for instance, to the militia troops versus the regular army, because they could be us, right? Like just show everybody. And so I think there's room for those kind of stories. I think they also resonate so well because the reader, that could be me. Whereas when you're reading about like super duper stormtrooper, who's trained from birth to be, God's gift to killing machines, like that's hard to imagine sometimes that could be you, right? Because it's a very specific set of circumstances. But the guy that's just stumbles into it, like that could be us, and I think that's what makes it resonate.
Right. You got the larger than life hero, and then you got the hero who's just some schlep who's thrown into the job and has to become the hero.
Sort of right place, wrong time kind of situation.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that one of your stories had aliens in it. So do you actually believe in aliens? Do you think there's
actually almost all my stories have aliens in them?
Oh, okay.
I would be shocked beyond belief if there were not aliens in space. I get into good-natured arguments with a good friend of mine about this, because she thinks that the UFOs are probably a real alien phenomenon, and my view is, probably not. But I don't know, but I suspect that if real aliens were visiting us now, they would be a little more detectable or overt about it. But in any case, whether they are currently visiting us or not, I'm pretty sure they're out there. And I think it'll be pretty exciting when dangerous, potentially, rewarding, potentially, but certainly exciting when we encounter them.
I think there's a movie with Jodie Foster, and she had a saying about aliens, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the movie, but if there weren't aliens, Contact. Yeah. It'd be an awful waste of space if there weren't.
Yes.
And so that kind of resonated with me.
Yes.
The one thing that I think that we tend to get focused on is everyone thinks life form has to be carbon based, but we found sulfur based life in the Yellowstone Flat. So I don't know that carbon based definition is required anymore.
I
And
think we
even
found sulfur eating life, not sulfur based. I think it was
okay,
based on carbon. But your point is certainly valid, and I have written silicon creatures, and I've written pan-dimensional creatures that don't really have an analog in our three-dimensional space. And yeah, there's no reason to think that I don't think that we're limited to just carbon organic molecules.
the other thing everyone assumes when we say alien, oh, you must mean ETs out there. But if we found microorganisms on another planet, by definition, they are aliens.
Yeah, yeah,
The trick with those would be determining whether they were there before we got there or whether we somehow brought them with us.
yeah.
Because we've proven that there are some pretty hardy bacteria and such that they've done experiments on the ISS, having them like outside the space station, and then they bring them home and they come back to life.
Right, the tardigrades, I think is what you're talking about. The
Yes.
little, those adorable little microscopic creatures that are Star Trek Discovery turned them into big. Never mind. I don't want to get into that. Yeah, I love tardigrades because they're just so damn resilient.
I know just enough because I pick up here and there reading the news articles. I know just enough to be dangerous and sound like I can maybe fake knowing what I'm talking about. But, I am a total neophyte when it comes to anything scientific. There's a reason I studied history.
So when I went to college, I thought I was going to study science. And I did, in fact, take some science courses in chemistry. But I discovered that I wasn't really interested in, science as it exists now. It involves so much specialization and really diving deeply into narrow areas. I might have enjoyed physics if I'd gone into that, but that's when I realized that I loved science as a watcher and learning about it, but I didn't want to do it, and that's really when I kind of turned my heading back toward writing fiction. So I do try to respect science in my writing. When I say that my work is hard, as at least has one foot in hard science fiction, there's always an acknowledgement of scientific realities in what I'm doing. Sometimes I really stretch it to the point that some I don't know, people who are particularly rigid in their view of hard SF might say, well, that's not hard SF because he's got all this multidimensional stuff. And when I do stretch it, I try to do it with some knowledge and awareness of what I'm doing. So to me, that leaves a grounding in real science, while still leaving plenty for the imagination.
Yeah, it's one of the things that, like, there are some hard sci-fi that is told really well and it's really engaging and you don't need a PhD to understand it. I think, though, at a certain point, and this is probably heretical to the hard SF, like, uber fans, at a certain point in time, we're all guessing because any, like, tree of research could branch at any unexpected point. So you take it too many steps forward of logical, if this, then that. At a certain point in time, you're guessing just as much as we are. When we use the hand-wavium approach, maybe it's a guess based in reality, but it's still at a certain point a guess.
Yeah. These things change. I remember sitting on a panel at a convention, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and the subject came up of whether we could have habitable planets around binary or trinary stars. And the scientific wisdom at the time was, no, it would be too unstable. They wouldn't last. And well, since then, we've discovered them. They do. It works. You can have planets around binary star systems. And so there's so many cases where what appears to be impossible, and of course, the elephant in the room here is faster than light travel. Most purists would say faster than light travel just isn't going to happen. And I say, well, maybe yes, maybe no. I hope it does. I don't know how it will happen, but I think the possibility exists.
I know that's the one thing Star Trek has given us. Normally I would say I'm a Star Wars fan overall. I grew up watching the movies and reading the books that are now not canon. But one of the things Star Trek did is it inspired a whole generation of scientists to say, hey, that thing that we had over there, let's see if we can actually make it. So you have Alcubierre, who did the mathematical formula for warp drive, that it's in theory possible. Now, his version, I think he used more energy than the sun has in its lifetime, if I remember the critique.
Yeah.
But there are other people who have made improvements to his original formula and said, if you factor in this, it's actually a lot less energy intense. And so, I mean, every time we turn around, we're learning something new. Just launching the James Webb Telescope, for instance, and new stuff is rolling in every day that we didn't know before.
Yes.
So I don't know that I'd rule out FTL either. I'm with you. I think as we understand it now in our current capabilities, no. But, I mean, if we get the battery situation covered and we can handle the energy problem, a lot of other stuff happens really quickly, I think.
Yes. So, since you're talking about Star Wars and Star Trek and the like, it dawns on me that you didn't actually mention Battlestar Galactica, which is of interest to me because out of the blue, I was offered a chance to write the novelization of the Battlestar Galactica miniseries that kicked off the Sci-Fi Channel's version of Galactica, which was a real kind of unexpected quick change in direction for me and a lot of fun to do. But that's a kind of an alternate view of spacefaring science fiction.
That is frequently used when we have a guest come back for the second time when I switch the choices up, because I love Battlestar Galactica. I use Battlestar as an example. Sometimes when they redo things, they make changes just to make changes to fit the current cultural zeitgeist that don't really serve the plot and in some ways hinder the original plot they're trying to recreate. I will say, though, Starbuck on the reboot that Sci-Fi did was an example of doing it right, because like her Starbuck's connection to the Adama family, when you change it to she's Starbuck's female and she was romantically involved with the son that died, and because daddy issues, she passed him before he was ready and he ends up passing away because of her doing that. And now suddenly that relationship with the Adama, like, it all makes more sense in a very compelling way, because who hasn't wanted to do something like that to help out a friend? And
right.
I don't know. I found it more relatable in the rebranding of Starbuck, the way they did it from the original. And I like both equally. I think that's an example you can give of doing those changes well.
Now, I, on the other hand, was not a fan of the original. And when I was asked if I wanted to write the novelization, my editor said, have you watched the reboot? And I said, well, actually I did. And the reason I did was because of an accident. At the time, if you wanted the Sci-Fi Channel, you had to have a particular package of channels on your cable service. And I didn't want to pay for that. So I didn't have the Sci-Fi Channel. And then the cable guy was setting up service to the neighbor, and he accidentally turned that station on for me. So suddenly I had the Sci-Fi Channel, didn't know why I did. I learned later why. And I thought, oh, they redid Battlestar Galactica. I wonder why they bothered, because I didn't like the original, but I really did like the reboot. And so it became, writing it was a really eye-opening experience for me, in a way that it took me into the show and thought about a lot of things that I wouldn't ordinarily think about in watching a TV show. And I just had a blast doing it. I spent 3 months doing it, and I had a blast, and it made me feel like I'm really kind of involved in this. And I watched the series all the way through and kind of scratched my head at the ending a bit, but it It was a remarkable achievement.
See, I don't know why I never even thought. Like, I liked Star Wars, so I went looking for the books. It never even occurred to me that there might be books out in Battlestar Galactica, and now I'm going to have to go diving and looking for them because I like them.
There were a handful. I wrote novelization of the miniseries, which is basically telling the same story but in novel form. And then they had a small series of spin-off novels, which were news stories told, kind of like the Star Wars books, news stories that told other side. Like a good friend of mine wrote a spin-off having to do with what was the character's name, played by Richard Hatch. Zarek? No, I don't remember his name, but anyway, so they had those, but interestingly enough, they were not very successful commercially. And 10 years before, any media tie-in book like that was a guaranteed moneymaker. Whether it was Star Wars or Batman or Trek or any of the others. But then the internet came along. And I think this is the reason why these books didn't succeed too well commercially, is that there were so many new ways to re-experience the story that, whereas before, if you wanted to kind of dip back into a show you liked, the book was about the only other way to do it. Now you got all these websites dedicated, and you can do it without necessarily having to pick up a book in the bookstore. So it was a lot of fun, and I'm proud of the work I did on it. But they didn't continue because they didn't sell as well as they thought they would.
I'm still going to go check it out because I'm interested. So hopefully,
yeah, please do.
I know
for any of your readers who are interested, you can download the ebook of my, and this was done with you can download it for free from my website. That was with the permission of the publisher. So go for it.
Well, I write book reviews for Upstream Review, so I might have to add to the list of things I want to review. Unfortunately, like, there's only so much time, and there are so many amazing books out there. Like,
yep.
I've heard the arguments against immortality as you got to live when all of your friends are slowly dying. And having experienced some of that in war, I get why that would be hell. But then I keep thinking, but all the books I'd finally get time to read, like, on the plus column, because there's so many books I want to read in so little time. So,
well, audiobooks have been my lifesaver in that regard because, I spend some time walking my dog every day, and that's when I do a lot of my reading, listening to audiobooks. So that's actually become a big fan of audiobooks.
Me too. That's how I get that's my motivation to keep going, is I'll find good books. And then when I'm like, oh man, do I really want to? And then the book will get to somewhere good. I'm like, well, I only listen when I'm walking, so I got to walk another half a mile. So like, I've lost 60 pounds just because the audiobooks kept me walking, because I wanted to know what happened next. So
there you go. And by the way, while we're on the subject of audiobooks, most of my books are available in audiobook. Some are really good audiobooks. Some I'm not as satisfied with the reading as I would like. But the Chaos Chronicles, I actually hired the narrator myself, and he's one of the best in the business, Stefan Rudnicki, who does all the Orson Scott Card stuff and Ben Bova, and just a wonderful reader. So this is a good way to experience my Chaos Chronicles, is to seek out the audiobooks.
I'll have to check that out. I'm a huge fan of Orson Scott Card's books. His Homecoming saga was some of the first like true sci-fi that I read outside of just the Star Wars stuff when I started branching out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's he's got a talent, very imaginative in the worlds he creates.
Yes, he is.
All right. Well, before we dive into the book that brought us here, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we'll be right back and get talking about his books.
Okay.
The war between Almacia and the Empire of Kolakovia is in its 100th year. Casualties grow on both sides as the conflict leaves no corner of the world untouched. Alarian Glaskov's quiet life on the fringes of the Empire is thrown into chaos when an impossible tragedy strikes his village. When he is conscripted into the Tsarist military, he is sent to serve in The Wall, an elite regiment that pilots suits of armor made from the husks of dead golems. But the Great War is not the only, or even the worst, danger facing Valerian, as he is caught in a millennia-old conflict between two goddesses. He must survive the ravages of trench warfare, horrific monsters from another world, and the treacherous internal politics of the country he serves. Servants of War, new military fantasy by Master of Horror Steve Diamond and international bestseller Larry Correia. Available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. Pick up your copy today.
That still makes me laugh that they mispronounced Bane.
Oh, sorry, I had to take my headphones off. It was a little loud in my ears, so I missed that.
I'm sorry. All right, so thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude, dear listener, dear viewer at home. So let's get back into the topic that we brought us here. So we wanted to talk about your Reefs of Time books. So where did you get the premise that for the world that is the Reefs of Time? Like, how'd you come up with the idea?
Well, it is it's a 2-volume story as published, The Reefs of Time and Crucible of Time. They are books 5 and 6 of the Chaos Chronicles. So they're a continuation of the story of John Bandicoot, the man I described, who started out in Triton and had an alien encounter and winds up out in the galaxy, befriended by a couple of odd aliens and some interesting AIs and some 2 and a fraction dimensional creatures. So you can pick up the Reefs of Time without having read the previous books. In fact, I provide a synopsis of the previous books, but it's not really necessary to have read the earlier books, although you'll have a fuller experience if you do. So they are at this place called Shipworld at the very edge of the Milky Way galaxy, which is a vast collection of habitats where races from a multitude of worlds have been either individuals or groups of refugees have been brought in to basically save populations or representative populations that have been endangered or destroyed. So Shipworld exists to kind of keep the light burning for races whose worlds are endangered by suns going nova, war destroying their worlds. The Earth was endangered by a dark comet that could have been caused a cataclysmic collision with Earth. And there are more worlds in danger all the time, and John and his friends are basically flung into situations where they have to cope. And the way to cope and the way to get back to someplace sensible is to try to solve the problem that this world is having. Or in the case of book 4, Sunborn, something is killing stars. What the heck is killing stars? And some of those stars are intelligent stars. And it turns out to be a malicious AI dating back billions of years from the center of the galaxy, where way back in deep time, there were a terrible series of wars, and killer AIs were developed, thought to have been exterminated, that weren't. And now they're coming forward in time, and our people are asked to try to stop them, and which is a pretty scary thing to be asked to do. And so it takes 2 of them to back to the homeworld of one, a fellow named Lee Jared. Bandicoot goes with him, and 2 others are sent back through they call it a ghost stream, but really it's using quantum entanglement to send them back into deep time in a virtual sense to try to discover how these malicious AIs are coming forward in time. And it was a book that I had clearly in mind when I started writing it. And somehow it took me 11 years to write, and it became huge in the telling. So it's a really kind of an epic story. And by the time I was finished and had it all polished, I decided it was too long to publish as one book. So I broke it into two, Reefs of Time and Crucible of Time. But it's really one 2-volume story. So if you go out to read them, don't start with the Crucible of Time, because you'll be starting in the middle of the story. Start with the Reefs of Time. As for what led me to that, I don't know. It was years and years of thoughts and images coming together and collecting notes. And I'm working now on the final volume, which is tentatively called Masters of Shipworld, where we find out who the people are who are really running this kind of arc. Excuse me.
So what would you say the age range is for readers? Because we have some families that I know listen to our podcast, and they've got voracious young readers. So it's always helpful for me to be able to say, if they're X age, it's appropriate.
Well, these are really any age. I mean, they're adult novels. I don't think there's anything in these books that would be a warning flag for, certainly teenagers could read it, young teenagers. If my 12-year-old self could have read it. There's in the series as a whole, there's a little bit of sex in there and there's romance, but it's not, I think it's good for anybody, any reader.
Okay, that's fair. I'm going to pull the cover up real quick. So how did you come up with the cover? Was it just the artist gave you it and you loved it, or was this what you asked for exactly? What's the story with this cover? Because
I worked with the artist so long on this cover. The artist, a fellow named Chris Howard, I got to know because he was a writer who took one of my workshops, and so I worked with him as a new writer. But he was also a very talented artist. He's a software engineer in his day job. But I came to him. He also did the cover for The Infinite Sea, which is book 3, and for one of my Star Record novels. But I brought him the concept, and we went back and forth. And he worked digitally, and he would make changes, and I'd say, well, this isn't quite right. So, but he managed to capture the essence of that character in the front is Julie Stone, who is a very strong character in her own right, but could also be considered a love interest for John Bandicoot, and the alien Ick behind her. And it was intended to the sort of shadowing or echoing of their images was intended to convey their journey backward in time. Down this thing called the Star Stream. The Star Stream and the Ghost Stream converge. It took us together quite a while to create this cover. And we did a similar process on the second cover for Crucible of Time. If you have that.
I do.
And that's Bandicoot and Lee Jarrett behind him.
I like that you get the spacesuit, that actually a space flight suit type vibe, but still has a futuristic look. I really dig that.
Yeah, that was all his work. I didn't suggest anything there. He just came up with that, and he came up with the thing coming out of that's sort of what looks like a wormhole. He did almost in a way it was kind of a squiggle in one of his drafts, and I said, "Can we do more with that? Can we bring that out more?" And I think I drove him crazy a little bit with all of my suggestions and things. But both of these are actually wraparound paintings. So on the print version, you see the image continues on the back cover. The type was done by a writer friend of mine named Maya Catherine Bonhoff, who we had worked together in an author co-op called Bookview Cafe that I was a member of for a number of years. I'm not anymore, but we have continued to work together. And she has it's kind of a sideline, does cover layouts for her fellow writers. So she did all the type for me.
I really like the covers. It almost looks like Hubble telescope images for the background.
Yes.
And I really like that. Sometimes when people do that, it gives it a I made it myself appearance.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I don't get that vibe. It's totally professional, but it still has that, almost like you're looking at a space nebula or something in the background.
Yes.
So I really like these covers.
I love the covers. I'm very happy with those.
They don't look like the computer generated vibe you're getting from a lot of covers nowadays. They have the hand painted early sci-fi book cover vibe to them, and I really like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Was that intentional?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's not like I didn't say, oh, don't make it look like CGI, make it look like real people, but I knew the work that he did, so we were kind of on the same page from the beginning.
Nice. Well, you did good work with your info and his know-how. I really like these covers. So
thank you.
And they're easy to read. So I'm colorblind. So sometimes these covers, I rely on my co-host to tell me what's there, and I just go with it. But these ones, I can actually read the type, and I could actually make out images. So I'm really liking it because it worked for me too. Sometimes I get left behind on the art side.
Are you able to pull up my website there? Could you bring up a cover from my website? Because I could show you an example of his work that I think is also outstanding. Starrigger.net.
Let me see if I can get that. So what made Starrigger as your website instead of your name?
Because of my Starrigger universe. And I was looking for something.
So which specific cover do you want?
Okay, if you find a book called The Infinite Sea, if you pulled on books, Chaos Chronicles, and you should see The Infinite Sea. It's book 3 in the series.
I can pull that. I'll give you just a second. I'm pulling it up. I saw an article on the front page where you wrote about coffee. Dude, we're there.
Oh, my picture of when I forgot to put the canister under the coffee grinder.
Yes. I was laughing.
That wasn't staged. That was really, oh God, no, I got to clean this up.
I've done that before. So sometimes, man, the mornings just hit harder than others.
Yep.
All right, I got the cover. I'm pulling it up. Give me just a second. All right. Now should let me. There we go. I'm pulling the cover up right now. I don't know how to make it do the share a website, but I do know how to save the picture.
Oh, there you go.
Copy it over.
Yeah.
So this is interesting.
This is an underwater scene.
Okay.
By the same artist who you were just looking at. And this company of people has just plummeted into the ocean on this alien world. And this undersea city comes into view. So the piece in the center is what's called a star spanner bubble that they traveled in between the stars, and basically came like a re-entering space capsule and plunged into the ocean, and then this undersea city was revealed to them.
Okay. So is this the one where the undersea is on an alien planet, or is this set?
Yes.
Yes. What makes them decide to put the city there as opposed to, on a landmass, on a, floating in the sky?
They're an undersea folk. They live and breathe in the water. They're descended from land-based people, but hundreds of thousands of years ago, they moved into the ocean and built their cities there. So they're kind of a mer folk. They're called the Neri.
Okay. Was there anything that made you decide to go that route? It's not something you see a lot. I'm curious.
It's all my subconscious. these things come to me, and I think, yep, they're underwater in this next story. Yep. It's just it's the way inspiration strikes. Can't explain it.
That's fair. So if you were going to give a elevator pitch, the 30-second elevator pitch for the Chaos Chronicles universe, what would it be for someone who hasn't read any of the books?
I'm going to cheat and look at my elevator pitch because I'm bad at it. I call it the Odyssey of a Company of Reluctant Heroes. Human, alien, and AI, each of them exiled from their homeworlds, thrust into confrontation with forces they barely understand. Their journey takes them across thousands of light years and into deep time. There are worlds to be saved, and they've been volunteered for the job. It's got cool aliens, humor, and a lot to ponder.
Okay. And it's not cheating. You already wrote it, so why work harder, right? Work smarter.
Well, okay.
We're talking about the Reefs of Time because that's the one when your publisher just reached out because you're writing the end of that trilogy.
And 6-book series, actually. 7-book series. Septology.
So you're reading the end of the arc that is the
yes. Right.
Could you start it there, or are they better off starting on book 1?
For people who like the full experience, it's always best to start with book 1, but you can definitely plunge right into the Reefs of Time. And as I say, if you want to know what happened in the first 4 books, there's synopses there to read, and it's woven into the story anyway. Even without the synopses, you should be able to be okay. I actually had someone who reviewed the audiobook of book 4, Sunborn, and she didn't know she was coming into the middle of a story, and she said she just flowed right into it and only discovered afterwards, oh my gosh, I came into the middle of this story, not the beginning. So yes, if you want to just dive right into this one, yes, you can do that. Absolutely.
Okay. That is something that is often very hard to do, and TradPub authors have to do that a lot because you never know if the book's going to be there. Like, just because they've got book 3 doesn't necessarily mean they'll have book 2 or 1. And then the lag time between publications, you have to assume that this might be their first book. On the indie side, that is one benefit. You got them all right there. Boom, boom, boom. It makes it a little bit easier for that one. Now, are these books you've self-published, or are they out with a traditional publisher?
The first 4 books were all published by Tor Books originally, but they're no longer with Tor. The current editions are my own editions, and because I parted ways with Tor at the time I finished the Reefs of Time, I self-published those. Those were my first self-published originals under my Starstream Publications in print.
Nice.
So that was a daunting process, bringing new books to press myself. I'd done backlist ebooks and things like that. I knew how to do that. That wasn't a big deal to me, but launching new books was a real challenge and a learning curve.
Yeah, I'm glad I have minions that help me with that part. It makes life a lot easier. Do you see the 7th book as being the end of the series, or is it potential that it'll grow and continue to grow as a series?
I don't really want to make predictions. It's intended as wrapping up the series, but I was thinking just today about kind of maybe an offshoot of the series that would be very interesting to write. So I'll go where the writing muse leads me. That's all I can tell you.
Okay. That's a fair answer. So for the Reefs of Time, what can you tell us about the main characters?
John Bandicoot, pilot, originally fitted with Neuralinks that let him control spacecraft direct mind to computer, but they burned out because of crappy nanomed technology. And winds up with an alien in his head, non-corporeal alien, and the two of them are exiled to this place called Shipworld. Ick is the first alien he meets and is befriended by, whose own world was destroyed when his sun blew up. Lee Jared, kind of a hyperactive, brilliant physicist from his world. He's a little bit simian in his physical form. He's very excitable. And Terry's is an empathic humanoid female, has some differences from humans, but close enough to make her attractive to John. Julie is a human from Triton who John basically has fallen for just before he goes on this mission that casts him into exile. Well, she receives a mission too, and she winds up kind of following him. There are two robots, Napoleon and Copernicus, that become sentient with some alien upgrades and become important characters. Oh, they're the shadow people, who are two in a fractal dimension creatures that look sort of like black rags fluttering in the wind, but they help maintain the technical infrastructure of Shipworld. That's probably enough for starters.
So you mentioned the one alien who has another alien living in his head. Was that hard to get across? Because on the one hand, you want it to be clear that it's almost internal monologue if he's talking in his head, but it's not his internal monologue. I could almost see how that could come off as almost schizophrenic.
I had to do some typographical tricks to make that work in the book. It was a challenge for my audiobook reader because he had to kind of differentiate the voices of the character in his head. And he pulled that off pretty well, I think. It certainly would be, I think these books would make a terrific miniseries, to be honest. That would be the hardest thing to convey, though, is the interior dialogue between Bandicoot and the Quarks, whose name is Charlie, in his head. Charlie has, I didn't mention Charlie as a character, very important character, who is practically ageless, but his species dies, and then it's like he dies, but he's reborn not too long afterwards with some of the same memories and not all of the same memories, slightly different personality each time. And so Bandicoot has to experience the loss of his death and then the shock of his coming back to life in his head. At the time, I didn't know that this was something that happened in Doctor Who. I discovered later, the Doctor does this too. Well, I didn't know that when I wrote it.
I guess if you were to do that on a video screen, because you mentioned this could be a miniseries, and it definitely sounds like something that sci-fi should do. Just the compelling nature of it. Although the underwater sets might be hard to on a budget, but you could almost go the route where you have somebody standing next to him that he's the only one that can see, so you can have the other actor there but not there. I guess it'd be the way I would do it if I was doing it from a visual only perspective.
Maybe, except then you presumably have a human figure, kind of almost like an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure. I don't know. That might be an approach that would work. It would take some really good script writing, I think, and good ingenuity on the part of the director to figure out how to do that.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you have some robots that have sentience. So do you actually think that's going to be our future? You think we'll actually see sentient robots?
I don't know that we will in our lifetime. I don't think we probably will, but I think we will. Yeah. It just seems to be a natural progression to me.
That was one of the episodes that I liked the most. I think it's called The Nature of a Man or something to that effect, where they were determining if Data was a person or a machine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was an interesting concept that definitely got me started thinking about what that looks like, especially when, and this is a family friendly show, so I will skirt around the issue. I suspect the first robots will come from a more primal purpose as they're being created for. If you know,
Yeah.
you know. And so
Yeah.
at what point in time do those suddenly become people? And thus, or at least sentient, and thus having rights? It gets some interesting ethical questions that could be fun to tackle.
Well, they've done some interesting stuff in movies already with that. Of course, there's a movie, there's Her, is that the title? About the operating system that the guy falls in love with. And I just watched, what was it called? Something like The Man for Me. Don't really recall the title, but it's a woman who agrees to have her husband or partner has died, and very human-like robot is brought to her to try to become a companion. And there's a lot of kind of how this dynamic develops between them. That was very interestingly done, I thought.
Yeah, there's the other one that I want to see that's Megan. I think it was like a children's companion type toy that goes a little off the rails because it's a horror movie, but it's about a robot gone wrong. That I definitely think there's fertile ground for imagination in the realm of robotics.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Now the big danger flag here that all the writers are looking at, and not just writers but movie makers and artists, is the AI that people are starting to grab onto and use it to. I understand it's become a big problem for the SF magazines that people have AI generated stories that they're submitting as if they had written them themselves. And we're going into a time when that's going to be a real sticky issue, I think.
I don't even know how you would know they wrote it. I don't know how they could tell. I'm not saying, I mean, I believe them that they're getting them. I'm just curious. I haven't really messed with it one way or another. So
I think they were able to tell by the language pretty quickly. It's like, okay, this wasn't written by a human, but I don't know any of the intimate details of it.
I know Galaxy's Edge, which is the sort of a reimagining of the idea that was Star Wars once upon a time, written by Jason Onspach and Nick Cole. Their latest books, in response to all of this, they actually have on the back cover of the print copy, it's like no AI is used, written with soul or something to that effect. So I think we're going to start to see those kinds of disclaimers on books, like no AI was used. I think you're going to see those lines, much like, this is organic or free range or, whatever you see in food. I think we'll start to see that on our entertainment.
AI free.
Yeah. So we've talked about the main characters, and you have so many main characters that I don't think it'd be fair to expect you to list all of the secondary characters. Was there a main protagonist that they have to fight that you can tell us about without spoilers?
Oh, well, I talked about the malicious AI. They're called the Mindaru, and they're they don't have physical form really, except in the machinery that they inhabit. For the most part, there are antagonists in the sense of people not getting along. For example, the Infinite Sea, the one set on the ocean world, there is a race of people called the Landers who are in conflict. They're not really enemies. They just don't, it's a lack of understanding of communication. You're mentioning secondary characters, and this doesn't answer your last question, but it's an interesting character. In the Reefs of Time, I had these people setting out on a small starship, and the assigned captain was this, it's called a tintangle, a sort of metallic, multi-dimensional creature that could sort of fold in and out of the three-dimensional plane. And she brought along what she called a go-cat, which was a little cat-like sort of thing with a triangular head, and it too could nip out of the dimensions when it wanted to. Its name was Bria, and I introduced this. I'm bringing this up because it's a little bit about the writing process. I introduced Bria because I thought, this ship needs a cat. I think not a dog. The ship needs a cat, and how about a weird alien cat? As the story developed, Bria kept getting into the action and becoming important in ways that I never imagined when I introduced her into the story. And she plays an extremely important role toward the end of the book, which I didn't know was coming until it came, and really kind of taught me a lesson or reinforced the lesson that you don't always know what a character's import is until the story gets further down the road. I don't know if Gandalf knew how important Gollum would be when he started writing the Rings story. So I guess the point of this is you can't always know ahead of time what's going to be important in the story and what isn't.
Okay.
It's a process of discovery.
And then the other part is you never know which characters are going to resonate with the readers, because sometimes I've seen where I'm like, wait a minute, that's the character everybody liked? You thought he was a throwaway. And they're like, no, we don't know this guy. So sometimes it surprises me on the production end what the readers resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
So we asked this classically, and one of our patrons of the podcast has asked us to bring the question back. So given that you have put all of your characters through this torment that is the series, if you met them in a dark alley and they knew who you were, the god of their universe, the creator of their hell, how do you see that interaction playing out?
Oh, wow. What an interesting question. They probably grab me by the shoulders and shake me and say, "What were you thinking?" It has brought to mind the comic strip Pearls Before Swine, where periodically the little animal characters come and complain to the artist who draws the strip, Steve Patsy, and said, "What's wrong with you? What's the matter with you?" I'd like to think that ultimately they would say, "Hey, good job, Jeff. It was okay. We thought it was bad for a while, but I don't know. You just never know in that dark alley what people are going to say." Or they might say, "Oh, you look bigger on TV."
Okay. So is there anything about the universe that is the series inhabits that you think makes it stand out from other sci-fi universes?
Well, I could say it's really well crafted and has some really interesting characters and cool aliens, and has a structure called the Star Stream that stretches from what was once Betelgeuse before it went supernova to the center of the galaxy, and which connects it to a couple other of my books. I think the ship world concept of a large gathering of structures and people whose purpose is to basically rescue and serve as a survival arc for those who might otherwise be destroyed is a kind of interesting one. And in this final book, I'm exploring the question of, okay, just how altruistic is this? It sounds very altruistic, and I think it largely is, but maybe not. Maybe those running it are not all in agreement about what we're after here.
So if you could live in this universe that you created, would you?
I think I am already. I'm just not far enough along in the timeline.
Okay. Unique answer. I'll take it. So you obviously have aliens in this universe, because we've talked about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
As a creator, how do you go about creating these aliens? Do you let Mother Nature inspire you? Do you make it up completely in your head out of, whole cloth? What's your process for creating the aliens?
I'd say it's a little different for every one. There's some creatures who come on stage a few times, but not for too long, called the Polloi. and they were inspired by flipping through a magazine and seeing pictures of sea cucumbers or sea combs, these really interesting, colorful, kind of like jellyfish, but a little more solid, that just float in the deep ocean and are just amazing. I could come up with 1,000 aliens just from watching nature documentaries about the deep ocean. It's incredible, the number of strange and bizarre creatures. So, all of that, most of my creatures aren't from a specific inspiration, but I think over the course of a lifetime, I just kind of absorb a lot of stuff that I see and think about, and it churns beneath the surface of my subconscious, and something comes out.
Okay. So is there anything about this universe that we didn't ask before we wrap it up? I think you've given some pretty thorough rundown of it, but was there anything we missed?
I think we've done a pretty good job, to be honest. Unless you want to ask where you can buy it.
I will be linking to that in the show notes, like we do with every interview about a book. We link to the book. Now, obviously, we normally by default go to Amazon. Do you sell direct on your website?
Not really. I have links to all the different stores from my website, so it's widely available in all of the ebook stores, and the print editions are available not just through Amazon, but Barnes and Noble. They're available from Ingram, so any library could order them. Any bookstore can order them. The audiobooks are in a whole variety of audiobook outlets, not just Audible. Some of them are available from your library. So I try to make my work. I'm not sure that it's the right choice if I just wanted to make money, but I want my books to be as widely available to readers as possible.
I like that. I think in this modern digital book realm, like I think a lot of times, unfortunately, libraries get left behind. And so some of the newer books aren't available. So I like that you do that. So because we will be linking to your website, for anyone who wants to find it outside of the Amazon ecosystem, you can follow that route, and he will have that on his website for you. Which I appreciate that you do.
And I have autographed copies of print books are available through my Etsy shop.
Nice. Do you do personalized autographed ones as well?
Upon request. Most people don't ask for it, oddly enough, but it always says on the page, personalized upon request, and I'm happy to do that.
Nice. So before we let you go, dear listener, dear viewer, this is the part where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. It really does make a difference. And with that being said, Jeffrey, how can listeners and viewers find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
I am at starrigger.net, and because it's so easy to misspell that, if you Google's my name or DuckDuckGo my name, it'll come right up. And you'll find me at starrigger.net, and that's where my blog is. I'm on Facebook at, I think it's facebook.com/Jeffrey A Carver. But anyway, I'm not terribly active on Facebook, but my blog does appear there, and I do respond to comments there. So that's the best way to look me up.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the bits, shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, for professional purposes only. We have our Facebook group and Facebook page. And more importantly, we have Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and email. And we have our new website with Spotify now that they bought out Anchor FM. But that is a lot of gobbledygook to say. Unfortunately, their website linking is a little less clean than it had been under Anchor FM. So just go to the Linktree, click the link for it. You don't have to remember anything. Just Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast and do your thing. When you go to that website, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until they I don't know. I'd say come out their eyeballs, but we've done that already. I'll have to figure something out for next time, people. I promise we'll do better. And if you want to drink some of that coffee brand coffee we talked about, use the code podcast grunts, and the link is in the show notes, and we'll get a little bit of a kickback, and you get a 10% discount. So I call that a win-win.
Hey, JR, can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
I was listening to one of your podcasts beforehand, and you were asking about beers, and everybody was running down IPAs. Well, I'm an IPA fan, although my favorite drink is margarita. But when it comes to beers, give me a good IPA.
I always thought it was only pretentious hipsters that said they liked IPA. So more power to you. I mean, IPA served a purpose. They were, an attempt to make beverages that wouldn't make people sick when they were in, extreme heat conditions where sanitation was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I just never really liked them, but it's nice to know people who are real too. So I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Was that something that was an acquired taste for you, or is it just, you just always liked them?
I liked them when they first came out. I don't like the super hoppy ones, and no double or imperial ones, but Harpoon IPA or Founders IPA. I like a good session IPA. I like that. I like a little bit of a hops kick.
Nice.
But truthfully, give me a good homemade frozen margarita from fresh lime juice, and that'll keep me happy for the rest of the week.
I've never actually tried. I need to. I spent so much time when I was enlisted drinking just straight cheap beer because it was cheap, or the simple stuff, the rum and Coke, the Jack and Coke, the orange juice and vodka, that I never explored some of the mixed drinks. So that is on my list of things to try.
Okay.
So, all right. And with that being said, dear listener, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on, Jeff. This was a lot of fun. We're definitely going to have you come back to talk about hard sci-fi.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
All right. And with that, dear listener,